Hi, welcome. I'm John Allen, host of Out in New Haven, where once a month we take a different topic of interest to the LGBTQ community in New Haven and Connecticut and explore it. And today we're going to be talking about Stonewall at 50 and Connecticut. Stonewall, of course, is the celebrated birth of the modern gay rights movement, LGBT rights movement, that occurred in New York City. And today we have can't think of somebody better than my guest, who I will introduce later. I wanted to mention that the New Haven Pride Center is the first queer center in New Haven, and currently one of only two in Connecticut. The New Haven Pride Center also runs the Dorothy Awards, which is the premier LGBT award ceremony in the state in the spring. And then also we run the New Haven Pride celebration, which occurs in September. And there's many organizations and groups that are meeting at the New Haven Pride Center. And we also facilitate the Centerline magazine, and you can pick that up at area locations around New Haven and Connecticut. So today we're going to be talking about Stonewall and the successes of the LGBT movement, not only in New York and nationally, but here in Connecticut. And we have someone that I've known about for many years due to his coming out in 1990, his very public coming out. This is Joseph Graybars, who was the first openly gay elected official in the state of Connecticut. Joe, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, John. It's always good to get together.
Yeah, and I can't think of anybody else that I would have rather had come and talk about this topic than you. I mean, you have helped create history, LGBT history in the state of Connecticut. And so, and you're still doing it.
Well, it's so many people in Connecticut have been involved, not just in their local communities or statewide, but even nationally in the LGBTQ plus community, that I think that Connecticut's become an incubator for leaders within our movement across the country and internationally. It's nice to see the freedom that we've helped to nurture here in our state expand to other places.
Yes. We were talking earlier, that Connecticut does have such a rich history of supporting LGBT causes. And, some of the things that I had mentioned was in 1970, we were the second state to repeal the sodomy laws that criminalized gay behavior and gay activity. But also we had, part of your coming out helped to usher in Connecticut being the third state to offer civil rights protection for its LGBTQ citizens. But there were some other things, too, that you were mentioning.
Well, Connecticut probably has passed more LGBTQ plus legislation than any other state in the country. And we've done it being signed by Republican governors or governors who were Republican and Democratic governors. I think even John Rowland himself signed at least a dozen pieces of legislation that included a gay and lesbian provision in it. So we've been tremendously successful here in the country, here in Connecticut, and have led as an example for other states across the country and in other places across the world. And not just around civil rights issues, but around other kinds of protections for our community, including being a leader and in the forefront nationwide on protections for people with HIV as well, right, which has had such a big impact in our community.
Yes, I mean, the APNH New Haven, which was AIDS Project New Haven, and they've now, they came on recently on this show, but they were one of the first in the country in 1983.
Some of the early fundraisers for HIV, we're here in Connecticut. We passed one of the very first, if not the first, state-funded needle exchange program here in the state, civil rights protections for people with HIV. We were one of the first states. We were the first state to pass a private insurance plan for people with HIV so that they could keep their current insurance, which kept thousands of people alive. And also Connecticut fed the civil rights movement in New York itself, where so much of the beginnings of the fight for our history, at least in this country, came from. And the synergy between Connecticut and New York and Boston and other places of the country has helped to fuel that as well. But I'm very proud of Connecticut for the work that it's done to keep people with HIV alive, to fight the disease, but also to fight for the civil rights of all people.
You mentioned that Connecticut does have this proud history, and why do you think it does? I mean, why do you think that this tiny little state, has been able to influence so much of what goes on around the country and the world?
That's an interesting question. I've thought about that many times. I'm not sure. I know that one thing is sure that's a part of it is that folks in Connecticut have worked very hard for it. And that's an important thing that, some people say, oh, well, Connecticut's a blue state, it's liberal. But the fact of the matter is Connecticut's a very mixed state
yes.
politically. It's elected folks on both sides of the aisle many times. It has a long history of being very bipartisan in that sense. I just think that folks in Connecticut have worked very hard at it, but not just in the area of LGBT rights. Connecticut was a leader in rights for women across the country. Many people from Connecticut were involved in the black struggle for civil rights in Connecticut. Connecticut was a leader in the fight against slavery. As a matter of fact, as a percentage of its population, more people from Connecticut died in the Civil War than any other place in the United States. So I think Connecticut has a proud history of fighting for freedom and for enabling people to be freed up to explore their greatest potential, regardless of their sexual orientation or their race or their religion.
And disability. I mean, my career has been in supporting people with developmental disabilities, and Connecticut has been on the forefront of that. I mean, starting with both good and bad. Some of the eugenics movement, which was revealed to be a pseudoscience. But we have really tried to always, as a state, support people with developmental disabilities and other types of disabilities. People leave the state thinking, oh, we're so expensive, and then they only to find that they come back because we have the services here.
There's a price that you pay for decent civilization, and I think Connecticut's worked very hard to have a decent civilization here.
Yeah, our quality of life, I think, is unsurpassed. I mean, we just have so many wonderful things that go on, and I'm proud that our state influences so much of what goes on around
Even just the support
country.
for the arts. I think part of the early prominence of the LGBT community in Connecticut was our representation within the artistic community. Westport became a center of gay culture, a very early center of gay culture, partially because it became an early artist colony, as did several other places in Connecticut.
It's also, isn't that the home of the only national park in Connecticut, is with the Weir Farm?
The Weir, that's correct, yeah, which is a center of artistic, or was a center of artistic excellence in the last century. And the Brook Cafe in Westport was one of the first gay bars in the United States.
1939, I did a story in Connecticut Magazine on that.
Fabulous.
And it really was, it was amazing because it really got its start prior to the Connecticut Turnpike. So it was a stopover for people traveling up to the Cape and to Boston from New York, and it was a place that was operating prior to 1970, when gay activity was criminalized, and it operated right across the street from a state police barracks. So there was something shady going on.
And
there.
Down the hill from Martha Stewart's house, right? Yeah. And I mean, I drove by there recently, and it's a patio furniture store. Right?
I know, how sad.
And in thinking about the fact that we're celebrating Stonewall 50, the loss of our history is as a community is tragic, and so much of it's connected to, our shame for centuries and who we are, and or the shame by society of us and squelching our history or erasing it. It's important this year that we're memorializing the struggle for civil rights with the celebration around Stonewall.
I think that's such an important distinction to say that our history has been erased and we really need to reclaim it. I think this is a good point to sort of mention what is Stonewall for some people that are watching that might not know what Stonewall is really about.
Well, we're in an interesting place right now because as more people know about it and as more professional historians get involved in it, as the National Monument has been created to memorialize it, the debate has picked up and it's become more interesting. It's generally referred to as a riot, but there are some historians, some gay historians, who refute the fact that it actually was a riot, that it was a reaction against police brutality during the shakedown of a gay bar in Greenwich Village in New York City. And the 3 days of reaction, violent reaction that lasted from that, helped to mark the seriousness of the gay movement from that point on. Folks got together, many organizations in New York and nationally see their beginnings from that week of protest and reaction to that police brutality, and it serves as a real starting point for the consciousness of our community to say, as we had previously, let's not just fight in the dark corners anymore. Let's fight for ourselves out in the open and acknowledge who we are as a first step for that.
Yes, and it is. I think it's, the thing that's so important that is within each person is to simply come out. And it's and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. As more and more people come out, it becomes easier for people to be open about who they are. And I know that your coming out was so public. And, maybe you can take us back to what that was like in 1990. I mean, this was before Ellen. That was sort of like, I always say it's the second Stonewall was Ellen's coming out in 1997 when she, came out on her television show and was on the cover of Time magazine and being so visible. And it was still a scary time, even though we, at that point, we were starting to have better civil protections in Connecticut, but you came out prior to that.
Well, Jesse Helms was active when I came out. David Duke, the KKK leader, was running for governor of Louisiana and then Senate from Louisiana. It was a time that the United States in its history has visited over and over again of overt racism and homophobia and panic across the general population. And so there seemed to me to be an urgency. And then, of course, the urgency of looking around and seeing all of our friends suffer from a disease that the government refused to even recognize. The president refused to even say the words HIV or AIDS. And so the anger that arose from that necessitated, I think, folks coming out and saying, well, yes, I'm gay and I have value and worth in the society and something to contribute. So I felt that there was an imperative, that there was a need to do this at the time that I was. That I wasn't the first openly gay elected official in Connecticut. Michael Moran, from an alder from New Haven.
Oh, Michael was.
Michael.
He was the first alderman. A young Yale student.
Yes, we were involved in politics at about the same time. I became the first openly gay state elected official and one of the third in the country. When we started the International Lesbian and Gay Elected and Appointed Officials Organization, there were only a few of us worldwide. Literally, we could sit around a table and have a discussion when we met annually. But it was this time. It was a scary time, and I felt that as someone in an elected position, that I had an obligation to be more open about who I was. Friends and family knew, folks obviously close to me knew I had been involved in the movement for a long time, including the National Organization for Women's Lesbian Rights Task Force, which was the forerunner of all gay rights movements in Connecticut in any serious long-term way. And so the reaction was pretty amazing.
It seems like it was mixed, because in the article in the Hartford Courant that I got a copy of that, there's a sort of a heart-wrenching story that came out about how your mother went to a diner and how she, all conversation stopped when she came into the diner, and yet, she was in your corner and she was very supportive of you.
Oh yeah, my mom was great. I received letters from all over the world, thousands and thousands of letters. Even occasionally today, I'll still receive a letter over the whole length and breadth of the time that it's been since then, since 1990. But it was such a unique event at that time that the headline of every newspaper in Connecticut, and most of the headlines of most newspapers across the country and in several places across the world, was about the size of the same headline that ended World War II. Right? What's now the Connecticut Post, the headline was Graybar's avows homosexuality, which I still don't completely understand. But it was that.
And that was your hometown newspaper.
Yeah, it was the lead story on the evening news when everybody watched the evening news. The only other thing that had happened that day was the president's budget director had resigned, and some stations put that first, some stations put that second. That was the scale of it. It was interesting. The photo that appeared in the newspaper connected with that was the first time that many places in the world actually saw a printed photo of two men intentionally kissing.
Wow.
Other than like a New York Yankees celebration.
I remember it vividly. I mean, that certainly spoke to me as somebody that I was not out at work at that time. I was not. No, I was not. Even though I had come out, my own personal coming out was in 1982. But I was...
So few people were, right?
Yeah.
You were out going with your friends to Fire Island, but then on Monday you put back on the jacket and tie or the nurse's uniform, and you got back to being the person who didn't talk about what you did on the weekend, right? Or in the evening. Yeah.
Oh, it was very powerful. It was so powerful. I mean, I just think of what you were doing. I mean, you were a public figure, and to come out so publicly was brave.
Well, there were a couple of arguments, right? Like, one was that the two people who had come out previous to me was Congressman Jerry Studs and Congressman Barney Frank.
Right.
And the public argument was, well, nobody comes out unless they're forced out, because they had both been involved in a previous scandal that caused them to come out. They were both outed, essentially.
Yes.
And then the other
in an ugly way, too.
In a very ugly way, a very personal way. And then the other argument was that, well, people don't come out when there's something at stake, when there's something to lose, right? They only come out when they have no other choice. And so I wanted to prove, not just to the folks here in Connecticut, but to a broader audience, that in fact I was proud enough of who I was that I would come out when there was something at stake. I would come out when nobody was making me come out, that it was something that I was proud enough about to do and want to do voluntarily. And I think it made a big difference into advancing civil rights legislation, not just here in the state, but the discussion of it across the country.
Right. And, as a public figure, I know that you've had, your personal relationship of the past. I don't know if I'm bringing up anything that you don't want to discuss, but, you had a very celebrated relationship with a movie star and Broadway star, Harvey Fierstein. And it was, I remember that in the Connecticut Magazine as well.
We were actually named Couple of the Year. And for Connecticut Magazine, which was a very big deal at the time.
It was owned by the Register.
Right, yeah. To actually put on they did a cover every year of like Couple of the Year, and it was Power Couple of the Year or something. And it was Harvey and I, a very gentle and loving man who, by the way, just got a couple more Tony Awards.
Yeah.
He has to at least have a whole room for them at this point.
I know.
Right? Yeah.
Now, how did you guys meet?
We met through mutual friends. We were organizing a statewide political action committee to raise money for political candidates. And a group of folks in Fairfield County were very interested in funding this, and about a dozen of us got together. And Harvey was one of the early people that they recruited for this brainstorming meeting, and I was too. And the two of us were the last two people left in the room. I think we talked for hours. And
two people that like to talk.
And we carried on that conversation joyfully for several years. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, that's wonderful, and it was so fun to experience that in the local press.
He was such a strong voice for being out, and as an artist has broken many barriers for the LGBT community, both personally and with his work. Really a tremendous person.
Well, what do you think are some of the things that, our movement here in Connecticut, what do you think that we can expect, and what are you working toward? And I know that you're still up in Hartford right now.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm lobbying for Gallo Robinson. We do nonprofit advocacy lobbying for many organizations, including civil rights organizations and HIV/AIDS organizations. We have two important projects now. One is to ban the panic defense, and Connecticut has a history connected to the panic defense somewhat, but it's when folks, as have occurred very recently in Texas and Florida in particular, claim that the fact that you as a gay person hit on me caused me to react in such a way that I wasn't responsible for my actions. And those actions have been used as a defense for murder. And people have gotten off murder charges using this. And of course, it's just pure hatred.
Right.
And there's no scientific evidence for any of what they claim. It's a homophobic reaction by the judiciary. And of course, with the judges that are being appointed now in many places in this country, it's important that we fight back against this.
Right.
Connecticut hasn't really seen a strong use of this defense here in any of our jurisdictions, but I think by passing a bill which outlaws that panic defense, we send a message to the rest of the country. The other is a project I've been excited about for many years. When I worked for the Empire State Pride Agenda in New York State, we established a LGBTQ plus Health and Human Services Network, which received funding from the state. And it advanced the quality of life for so many people in our community in that state. It's still around today. It's still a major funder of other LGBT organizations in the state of New York. It's been so successful that California has copied this program. I would like to see the state put into statute the establishment of a network like that here in Connecticut so that we can do a needs analysis to find out demographically and geographically where are there gaps in health and human service needs for our community. Are there senior citizens in a part of Connecticut without outreach to anyone in their community? Are there gay youth in any part of Connecticut in danger of suicide?
I really want to mention about the gay youth. I mean, we know that our population is really about the Williams Institute from UCLA declares that we've got about 3.5% of the population. That's really, it used to say 10%, but we're really 3.5%. But yet, how many queer youth are homeless? They still are being kicked out of their homes, kicked out of places where they're in foster care or don't feel safe. I mean, it's exponentially queer youth that are homeless, and we see that certainly at the New Haven Pride Center with requests for service. And so we absolutely know that youth is an area that we need support.
Hate has side effects, and one of the side effects is that members of our community get targeted quite frequently for some of the underside of aspects of our society. Wouldn't it be great to know where the gaps in those services are, and then to work with state agencies to recruit providers for those services, and to make sure that the services that are already being provided in both health and human services meet our needs, do it culturally sensitive, and to provide a forum so that all of the leaders of LGBT social services can be together to know each other, to interact, to network, to learn what best practices are, and to bring that message to other places, not just in Connecticut, but outside of Connecticut as well. I think it's very important.
Yes, I think it is. Now, you know, in our last remaining moments, I just want to take a moment to recognize that, you know, you and I think, are born in the same year. And, you know, certainly within our lifetime, homosexuality has been illegal. It's been for criminalized. We've been regarded as insane, and our civil rights have been denied. And yet, you know, I think that it's, you know, there's so much to look forward to, you know, going forward. And
as Maya Angelou said, and yet we rise.
That's a great ending. I really just so appreciate you coming on here
and
recognizing, you know, where we have been as a movement for 50 years, but also to update us on some of the things that you're doing. It's just so exciting. Keep on making history.
Keep on the fight, John.
Well, thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Well, this is John Allen, host of Out in New Haven, and we've been speaking with Joe Graybars, who has been in the fight in Connecticut for LGBTQ plus history in Connecticut. And until next time, thank you.